get into the second and third generation of people supporting the analytics, to go back to your example of Minority Report, if you carry the whole plot line out, the system was masking the truth. And so the whole movie was about Tom Cruise finding the truth. And I have a fear that with the analytics, you go a couple of generations of developers, and the truth and how the truth or what is being presented is lost. And so I'm real concerned about the in the analytics as to how do you sustain it and how are you addressing that?
Yeah, regarding how much data is too much data first. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. We had a team that was looking at how we were going to handle data mining and management of our data assets in the plants. And one of the conclusions that the team reached was that we had plenty of data. We were looking for opportunities for additional measurements that would help us further optimize the plants. And in some regards, we came up with a conclusion that we had more data than we could conceivably use. I wasn't in agreement with the conclusion, but that was the conclusion. Regarding sustainment, so there's no magic bullet except to say, if you learned one thing from the presentation this morning that we had on risk management, it's that we tend to have a system for everything. So it turns out that for most of these things that are put in place that are not managed by an individual, that are not done by superhuman heroics of an individual, but that are done as a project, there's a sustainment activity that goes along with it that's an ongoing management activity that tracks whether these things are being used, whether they're still useful. Now whether our analytics in a broad sense fall into that category, not all of them, but certainly the ones that are the most critical and the most significant and the most expensive to implement. So that's been quite a challenge, but we have systems in place to do that are regularly managed and stewarded. Does that?
Ted, would you like to address that too? Because they're doing something at Sherwin-Williams to try to deal with this situation of being able to reuse the data. If you change your mind a year from now, what you were looking at and what you're doing.
Is the question how much data is too much?
There were two questions. The way I heard it was two. One is too much data. The other one, though, was that what you were alluding to, at least, is that what you may be doing today in a few years, you may not be, either the people aren't there or you may not want to have the same. You're using the word analytics. I'm thinking metrics and things that are calculated and measured.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So in the sense of the things that you're displaying now are not the right things to display, that you're calculating and displaying and using to drive things.
If you're
okay, that's why I said, Ted, you might want to address it.
Institutionalized, then over time, it becomes.
Sure. I mean, what I would say would be stay engaged with your customer. Who is the owner of that dashboard? That's the person that you need to stay engaged with so that they know that they're getting good information from it. If those people have moved on, then it's almost becomes worthless in a way. They can give you guidance and what needs to be, if the data elements are accurate or not accurate. Concerning the amount of data being stored, I would recommend summarization, maybe daily summarizations, and then letting some of this data trickle off, maybe after a quarter. And then you keep the summary for your long-term historical purposes. Again, it has to paint the entire picture that your business is needing. So I, again, would reach out to the customer, get their input on the dashboard situation, and then see if the data that you are storing accurately reflects the intent of that program.
Just a comment I would make from talking to other people, to other companies and things. Most people I know, they don't see the data they have lots of data, too much data. Many people would say that. But I don't find them throwing it away. I'm finding them buying bigger and bigger storage systems Now thinking about shifting to the cloud, all kinds of ways to keep that data. So one thing I think from the too much, I understand what you're saying, but and they might not use it. The other thing I think that I like, I'm a quantitative guy. I happen to have a PhD in operations research, so I love this stuff, and I love statistics. I love to analyze. So for me, I think, there's lots of things you can mine in data using things to do data mining, to come up with different dimensions. There's all type of statistical techniques to try to reduce the data set and things like that that can truly give you new insights. Though, as Doug said, that might be a little forward thinking. It's easy for me to say because I'm the analyst, but I don't know the problem. And I'm not trying to use the data. I'm trying to make use of the data. So that's a different question. But I do see lots of people, there's a big market today for very big storage systems. And it's being driven by that.
I'd like to add just a point on that.
Sure.
I tend to think of not logging calculated data, more of trying to log raw data in the database, so that I can perform different calculations later on, depending if I need to change it. And it's better rather than storing in one big flat file, if you will, isn't really a good method. Think of a good structure and potentially partitioning the data into different types of chunks. Maybe look at month chunks or 1 year chunks, so that you can pick a small sample size of data and perform a lot of analysis on it to kind of get good ideas of what's really going on, so that you can then apply that calculation to your more of your data, looking back maybe a year or 2 years, and rather than just looking at a small subset.
Again, I'm sorry, let me just make one other comment, because I do a lot with the enterprise companies. And I'm sure many of you heard of SAP HANA. And I'm not trying to promote SAP here, but that's a very big product today. It's a memory storage system. And one of the big things is you can put terabytes of data in memory. But the biggest issue with that is specifically to not do what you just said. It's specifically they're trying to address the issue. Now this comes, I think from the business world more, but I think it's relevant to process control. For years people have always had to summarize data. You collect data, then you summarize, get hourly averages, daily averages, monthly averages, and stuff like that. One of the primary goals for SAP HANA is to completely do away with that, because they do that in business systems today as well. They're saying, no, you have so much data, you can have so much and store it, all the data, raw transactions, and then create that dynamically. If you want a summary, summarize it. But their whole point is to try to get away from that, and actually they're restructuring SAP's core. They just came out with a new thing, their business, I forget the term for it, but their ERP system, their basic business applications now are for SAP HANA, and a big change in the structure, the architecture of that was to do away with lots of summarization and to just deal with raw transactions. But then what you have to do is you have to shift to different kinds of data models and things like that, dimensional data models and things like that.
We have a question here.
Okay.
Well, more of a comment. One of the departments that I lead, they go out and take some standard programs and do dashboards, and we're trying to build that up. But I told them they couldn't do that unless they also did training. And so to the questions of how do you keep people engaged, somebody said you need to be going back and talking to people. That is very, very correct. But also we have a very extensive training program to make sure that people want the products that we bring to them. And the training, by the way, is by and large mathless statistics, but just wanted to add that.
It's math and statistics, you're saying?
Mathless statistics. I told them they could have more than 1 or 2 equations on the entire 3-day program.
Yeah. Oh, well, does anybody have a comment on that? Does anybody up here want to comment on what he just said? That wasn't a question per se, was it? Okay. Go ahead.
So I have a question on data validation. What happens is you collect the data and you present them and you get the morning phone call telling, oh, that's not the production I made, the tank shows so less. So I just want to get your opinion. Who validates the data in this network?
Go ahead. Okay. Dan, would you like to answer? Go ahead.
So you want to know about data validation and who's checking it, or what do we do about it, or? Well, that's where I think the collaborative nature comes in. We have to have some familiarity with the process, so we can initially, as we're testing and we deploy, we can keep an eye on things. But that's also why it's important to have that the site be engaged and really be keeping an eye on things for you. So it's kind of a cross-functional effort. And again, to come back to storing just that raw data, if we have derived metrics, we always want to have that flexibility where we might not get it right the first time. We've gone back to data and metrics multiple times. So really, I think the onus is on both ends, the users and the developers or administrators.
I would also say that's why you don't want the information pre-run and the information that you're storing from the PLC. You want that raw information coming across so you can run calculations in your database, and we can run them a dozen different ways if we need to until we get the true picture of what's happening in the factory. So storing that low-level data straight out of the PLC, we can keep rerunning until we get our analytics or our queries correct that accurately reflect what's happening.
Overemphasize enough that I agree with this strategy of being able to go back and rerun data and storing the lowest level data. Absolutely critical. And the number of times that we've either changed an analytic or a KPI or whatever, and we want to go back because we've discovered flaws in the data and ways to do systematic corrections on the fly is large. Okay, I want to add that the owners of the results of some of the analytics are, in our case, responsible for the data validation, right? I mean, if you're running a process plant and the validation is, do you have a material balance or do you have an atom balance or some other kind of quality check? It's the folks that are looking at those analytics, and in fact, to some extent, some of the analytics that are in place to know whether you can believe the instrumentation or not. In fact, the example that I showed that was the flow meter, inferred error tracking is precisely that kind of thing. It's there to help you understand whether you can believe your instrumentation or not.
Do you have a question?
This is Rajesh from Tata Consultants. This is for Doug. You explained the various stages of maturity from reporting to discover. And as you move along, the complexity of the data processing goes on increasing. Now, have you come across a situation where you are hitting the limits of your computational power that you have and need for high performance computing engines?
Yes, sure. Although I'll say most certainly the installed base that we have is not something that pushes current computing limits, but we're certainly looking at what types of analytics we ought to have in place that would take advantage of those kinds of capabilities. I would say a good example of that type of thing is in economics planning, where you want to look at complex economic response surfaces for the decisions that you're making about what your product mix is going to be or what kind of raw materials that you're going to run. And frequently those are fairly complex optimization problems, and if you want to solve them exhaustively, we don't have any way to do that now unless we go to really, really large systems. I've seen just brilliant demonstrations by some of the vendors in our area in the last year, in fact, on using Amazon cloud services to just seize a huge number of cores and run a lot of analytics really, really fast.
We've seen some poorly written queries that go really slow. I mean, you got to keep track of your queries. It ran great the first week. 3 months later, it's as slow as a dog, and you got to keep going back and monitoring your process or monitoring your applications to make sure that those queries are optimized even as time goes on. So it may be at one period of time it was optimized, and then over time as more data collects, you start to see it slow down more and more. Your IT department can bring a lot of tools to bear in that regard.
I also just want to add, don't fall into the trap of buying a very expensive data warehouse appliance to hide bad queries, because you'll see that a lot. You'll see, $1 million solutions to a half-hour fix. So I'll throw that out there.